Hello anglers, we're live at the Anglers Covey, the Signature Tying Tour with Umpqua Feather Merchants. Excited to be here. It's a beautiful bluebird day outside, so I appreciate everybody being inside. We're going to go over some cool flies, techniques, and strategies. We're going to start off with the tube midge. Following that, we're going to do the Titan tube midge, and then we'll do the mini leech jig radiant, some of my favorite spring patterns. So hope you enjoy, and let's get things started. So first things first, tying in the spring months, I'm a fan for the tube midge in specific and tying with 2488H. And the reason I like this hook is because it's strong enough to supply power for some of your larger trout, 2x strong on the hook shank with a straight eye. We're also going to use small wire for this fly. And in addition to the small wire, we're going to use micro tubing. Now, I have to warn you, and I tell everybody this because it's true, I recommend that you start and complete this pattern using the wire and tubing pre-double IPA. If you attempt this after double IPA, there's a chance you cannot feed it through. It's going to be nice because the way we set this up is we're going to apply the small wire into the micro tubing, which sets up and creates what I like to call sticks, which we have here. Now, any one of your sticks can tie anywhere from 3 to 4 midges. Cool thing about each stick too is that it designs multiple colors. On the market today, it's crazy to think, but there's over 12 colors of wire and 20 colors of micro tubing. So you can mix and match to really develop the fly that's going to be best suited for your home waters. Now the Titan tube midge and the tube midge are available in a variety of colors and makes. For the tube midge with Umpqua, it's available with the tungsten bead. I'm going to show you today, how we're going to tie that using a gill tuft. And the gill tuft we're going to use is Glamma Madeira. And the reason I'm a fan of Glamma Madeira is you have the tuft coming out the front side of the fly. It's covering the hook shank in the middle of the back of the fly, so you're disguising the eye of the hook. It really does work well and supplies great opportunities to allow more opportunities for fish to see this fly. And even though you don't always have to use it, it can also supply a parapost. Last but not least, the thread on this fly is going to be 8/0 uni thread. And we're going to start the fly by having the hook in the vise. And when we put the hook in the vise, just make sure you're keeping a straight shank moving forward. Don't want it tilted down or too high up. And for those who are getting started in fly tying, you want to use a tag in that's relatively small, 1 inch to 1.5 inches in size. You don't want to go overkill or overboard. Now, when we tie this, your hook, you're going to have it in the vise. And when you're wrapping the thread around, always remember you can use a ramp for the tag end, leaving it up on the back side, which we'll use later in the tie in the way we design this fly. Now, the big question I receive from many anglers is, why the tube midge? Well, it starts out, it sounds kind of cliche, but the story is behind the tube midge itself. We did a fly tying class, and then after that, we had a class on the river. And the river portion of the class, we realized after seining, all the bugs in our hands were clear, and they had clear segmentation and different wraps along the body. So I thought one night, why not design this fly where it's clear, but it also has segmentation along the body? And that's how we came up with these sticks. Now, the reason you have to do this pre-double IPA or spirit drink is because if you attempt it afterwards, the challenge is feeding the wire into the tubing. So when we do this, you'll see it here, the wire into the tubing. The key here is that you want to do like we on the water would do with the tippet, and you're stabbing it into the eye of the hook. Now, when you stab the tippet into the eye of the hook, you want to line them both up and then stab moving to your left. Once you have the wire inserted into the tubing, you then want to do counterclockwise twist with your non-dominant thumb and index finger and allow the tubing to move onto the wire. That's going to supply enough control to where this doesn't bend the whole time, and it gives you control for every wrap. Now, to start things off, opposite side of the tag end we're going to apply, I'm going to pinch right at the transition of the wire and tubing. And then on the opposite side from that, we're going to wrap it around the hook shank. And when we're doing this, I'm going to supply one wrap and a second wrap of wire, and then continue forward with wire and tubing. And by doing this, I'm supplying nice, even, clear segmentation on the body, which supplies the material to the fly on the hook shank. But most importantly, when this is completed, you'll notice I just have 2 tag ends, 1 tag end of wire, 1 tag end of wire and tubing, and I'll move the tag end of wire and tubing to the left. And by doing this, the clear segmentation you build and develop on the body really does supply a lot of nice different segments to where this fly looks and represents the natural food supply on any given waterway. So keep that in mind as you're wrapping this forward. Now, when we supply the thread, again, we're going to use small tag ends of thread. And when we wrap this to the left or to the right, make sure that tag end's flush. You can bend it up a little bit higher. Now, for those who are getting started into fly fishing and most importantly fly tying, remember it's all about preparation and control. And controlling each one of these wraps, we want to make sure that we start behind the eye of the hook and we wrap right to the left, moving towards the bend. When we move towards the bend, this is a little unstable here. We're going to wrap all the way to the left, grab the tag end, cut that relatively short, and if need be, we can wrap it all the way up to the bend. Now, from this point, when you wrap the wire and tubing to the left, we want to make sure, we'll do 1 extra wrap here. Make sure the tag ends are facing up, and then when you move this forward, we'll do 1 loose wrap, and then we'll do a 2nd loose wrap moving forward, and then switch hands and secure wrap twice. Once you have this secure, grab the scissors, cut it flush right above the hook shank. We're going to cut that flush right about there. Wrap the thread moving to the right, and then also wrap the thread moving to the left. And we're just trying to develop a nice clean head here, even wraps of thread. And most importantly, what we want is a clear runway. We want to make sure that every wrap with your material, when you move it forward, is nice and flush. Now, the other thing to remember here too is when we supply the gill tuft, again, we're going to be using Glamma Madeira. And Glamma Madeira is a great material. Most importantly, when you grab each rope of the Glamma Madeira, it's going to have 6 different ropes within, or 6 different strands. We want to grab 3 of those to develop the head. What we're going to do is we're going to bend this around the thread, elevate the thread up, and then we're going to slide this down to the hook shank and then do 1 loose wrap with tension and then hold it below. Now, at this point, we want to switch to our non-dominant hand, and the reason for this is I want to make sure that when I grab the Glamma Madeira, it's flush against the back of the fly or above the hook shank. We'll then do 1 loose wrap moving towards the eye, a 2nd loose wrap moving towards the eye, and then switch back to my dominant hand. And by doing this, you'll notice that the gill tuft is riding right on top of the eye of the hook, so it's going to disguise the eye of the hook. Cool thing here too is if we need be later on, we can take advantage of this long gill tuft sticking out on the front end. So then we're going to wrap that thread moving towards the left, the bend of the hook, and again covering up any exposed dark or exposed white spots that are bleeding through. You want to develop and build a nice clean head, and again, you're trying to make sure the head's about the same size and diameter as the body on the fly. Now, when we get to this point, there's a couple things we can take advantage of here, and again, we can utilize the thread, making sure it's small enough to match the diameter of the hook shank. You could have a bead here if you didn't want a gill tuft. You could have a tuft coming up to the left side. You can also just have this plain thread head as well. It doesn't always have to have a bead. It doesn't always have to have a gill tuft sticking out of the front side. Now, years ago at the fly tying event, West Denver Trout Unlimited fly tying event, I decided at that day, that specific time, I'm going to keep everything on my desk nice and organized, nice and clean. Most of the time when I start tying, I don't know how everybody else feels about this, but it's like a bomb goes off. This specific day, or what could happen in the past, is I like to use Loctite superglue. And the reason I like Loctite superglue is it adheres clear and it adds cement and adhesive to your fly. So on this specific day, I decided, okay, I'm going to be organized. In the past, this is what would happen. I grab that Loctite superglue, I'd place it on the business card. You and I'd be in conversation about the biggest fish we've ever seen. I'd stick my elbow on the table, and then dang it, next thing you know, I'm stuck to the table. And I was like, right, I'm going to take control of this. So what I decided is I'm going to take the Loctite superglue, and I'm going to put 1 drop on top of the magnet. And when you start tying flies, there's a couple things you'll hear. You don't have to worry about spending money because it's cheap. Each one of your flies is inexpensive. This is true, but the amount of money you spend on materials is going to surpass that big time. You are going to spend some money on tools, materials, and everything else. You'll also have 5,000 of these magnets all over the place, and you'll think, what in the world am I going to do with these magnets? Well, if I place 1 drop of Loctite superglue on top of the magnet, it'll literally stay moist for up to 2.5 hours, which is incredible because the oxygen cannot penetrate the superglue. This allows you to add adhesive or the cement or glue to each one of your flies and gives you a chance to represent a durable pattern. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we've designed, is a very durable pattern that's effective in multiple areas, multiple river systems. So at this point, we're going to use the whip finish tool. And the way we're going to use this, very effective way, when you first start fly tying, this will be your friend and your enemy. It's difficult to learn how to use this tool, trust me. Once you get used to it, you get a pattern and a rhythm down, it becomes a little bit easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the handle of the whip finish tool, and I'm going to pinch the ball on top. That's below the metal tool arm. At this point, when I pinch the ball, I'm going to grab the thread and pull it towards my body. I'm going to use a tag of about 3 inches. I'll then hook the thread, elevate it up to the back side, and then release the ball, which allows me to move and manipulate this arrow, place it on the side of the hook shank, and then roll the ball forward once, twice, 3 times. And after doing this, you'll have a little bit of a tuft left over. I'm going to release the tag on the back through the divot, pull the hook down, and that's a whip finish knot. So again, we're going to pinch the ball, hook the thread, elevate it up around the divot in the back, roll it around the head once, twice, release the divot, pull the hook down, and then we're going to grab the scissors and cut the thread right below the hook shank like a knife through butter. That way it's going to lift up and that thread's going to disappear right into the eye of the hook or the thorax and allow you more control on opportunities. Now at this point we have the tag end, and the tag end is going to be sticking off to the back with the wire. And the reason when I designed this fly there's no thread on the body is I wanted it to represent something clear and look natural. So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab the wire and we're going to helicopter this counterclockwise until it breaks. We want to keep tension here, and again, when it breaks, it's going to break flush to the hook shank. Now I have this small piece of wire. I'll then dip that small piece of wire into Loctite super glue and get micro droplets, which is what we have here. I can then wipe those on the bend of the hook. I can grab that and also wipe those on the eye of the hook, or right behind, on the thread. Make a nice moist head. And if you get too much, you just want to dab it with your finger. Do it on both sides. And the end result is the tube midge that we have here. Beautiful fly, and again, matching the coloration to what matches your river system. Every time I'm fishing a river, I develop and design flies that are going to be durable, realistic, and versatile. The other thing that I like to use when I have any midge or any different pattern during the spring, I'll fish red and black, and I fish them in tandem to start any given day. The reason I want those in tandem is I want to make sure that the fish is either on the red attractor or it's on the natural color black. You can determine that within the first hour. You also notice that this post is sticking out on the front side is quite large. So let's say you show up to the river and the fish are eating on the surface, selectively rising. When trout have to expose their head above the water's surface, they're exposed to predators from above. It becomes a spooky scenario. So instead, let's say that we apply floating to this, and now we have a parapost, and the midge is hanging 1/2 inch below the surface. The trout will still come up and eat just below with its back bulging out of the water. It's not technically a rise, but it's enough for that to expose the dimple on the water surface and where the fish is actively feeding. So that's the reason I leave this tuft a little bit long, and if need be, we can always cut that short to the natural size, and then when we throw this out afterwards, you can see what we have. A nice, beautiful post extending off the front side, and that glam of Madeira is incredible stuff. Again, when you watch that throw out, you can see all the small little fibers and just how effective that can be. Now, it doesn't have to be out the front on the gill tuft. You can have it coming off the back like a wing case. You can also, again, have this in thread, or you can have it with a tungsten bead. I don't know about you, but as I'm starting to tie and unwind and loosen up a little bit, a nice glass of red wine. So we're going to attach this to the Snoop Dogg cork, and I'm going to pass that around the room. If you haven't tried that red wine, it's pretty incredible. Inexpensive, so we can spend money on our fly tying tools and gear. And the end result is what we have there. The red tube midge, again, this is available with the Umpqua in black, copper, and red with a tungsten bead. And the one you see represented here is with the gill tuft out of the front side. So we'll save these at the end. We can pass them around the room so everybody can take a look at them. I normally would say if it's still wet or moist and it sticks to your finger, you can keep it. This sucker's going to be dry. So I apologize for that in advance, but we'll raffle those off at the end. Again, a great pattern, great imitation. Sizes for the tube midge can range anywhere from upwards of 16, 18, all the way down to size 24. So yes, the 2488 can be all the way down to a size 24. It's literally strong enough to you could hook a steelhead and that fish is not going to break off. So keep that in mind. And again, a great imitation to use during the spring season. Now, how many here, I'll ask the audience at home and everybody here, how many here fish stillwater? Show of hands. That's great. If you haven't experienced still waters, it's unbelievable how strong the fish are. And the chironomid bite is incredibly important. It's the most important food supply in any given still water. Now, if you haven't hooked fish into still water, it gives you an excuse to come down to the Angler's Covey today, buy a brand new rod, reel, and fly line, because you'll need it when these fish blow you into your backing, I promise. It's always worth the effort. Now, we talk about still water bites and the opportunities to follow. Chironomids in sizes, let's say 12 and 14, 16, and 18. That's normally the size range I'm working with. Colorations are going to start with something red or green. You can also mix and match. A lot of my chironomids available with Umpqua are black and silver, red and copper, black and red, and then we also have green and blue. Now, the one I'll design for you today is going to be a red body, and we're going to use small wire. And again, the wire we're going to use today is going to be gold, and we're going to insert that into clear microtubing. Now, once again, I really do encourage you, when you're applying all the materials to this hook and you're starting the tie, do this pre-double IPA. If you attempt wire into tubing post-double IPA, it's never going to happen, I promise. You can also challenge yourself with a nice handy, any one of the fans in your room with water behind, have somebody spray water into the fan to give you the effect of what we deal with on the South Platte River. Get used to tying flies, tying knots, all of that in windy conditions. Now, next to that, when we use the clear microtubing, red, you can mix and match the colors to your heart content. Now, when I start to match colors and I put different wire into bold colors of microtubing, it's amazing how much sheen and shine you get from that actual material itself. Now, in this specific tie, we're also going to use large tencel, add a little bit of flash. One of my favorite materials to use, which is going to be ostrich. You may look like a cheerleader up here, but I promise you'll be cheering with the size of the hook that eat this fly afterwards. When you select plumes, you want them to be very large. You want each one of the plumes extending off to be 4, 5, or 6 inches in length. That way you get the right size fibers for each one of your designs. Now, the bead we're going to use on this, I'm a fan of using tungsten beads. Tungsten bead that we're going to use is going to be a 3/32. And a lot of your chironomids on the market have a white bead. This can represent a gill tuft, it can be an attractor, just something to get the fish's attention as they're swimming by. I decided when designing this fly, let's go ahead and add white, but let's give it movement. The advantage to ostrich is that when it's standing up tall below the water surface, it holds its form while it's breathing, pulsating, and undulating. So it really does work well. And again, gives you wonderful opportunities to design flies to get some of those larger fish when they come over and try to take your fly. So the hook, last but not least, the most important, is going to be a 2302. And the 2302 hook is going to be a straight shank. Now, we dropped on the floor the microtubing, which I found the stick. Another trick there, we're all human, it happens. If you don't find the stick, have a big magnet. Make sure that you don't leave hooks on the floor. I don't know about you, but I find them in my sock, in the laundry, you name it. Luckily, not the sandwich when I have it for lunch. But designing this fly, just like we did the tube midge, we're going to have wire and tubing, and we've designed a stick. Each one of your sticks can develop 1 or 2 different imitations, and we've inserted the wire into the small microtubing. Now, the way to do this, just like on the river, if you're stabbing tippet through the eye of the hook, you want to line them up. You want to be perpendicular, make sure that they're lined up with each other, and you're going to stab the wire into the microtubing. Again, you have had no alcoholic beverages, so you can do this because you're not seeing anything fuzzy. We're then going to grab our non-dominant thumb and index finger, and we're going to do counterclockwise micro twists, moving the tubing onto the wire. And by doing that, we develop the stick, which you can already see the sheen and the shine. Now, at the bend of the hook here, unlike the tube midge, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 wraps of wire and tubing, then I'll slide the wire and tubing down to the hook shank, and then I'm going to continue forward with the wire and tubing itself with loose wraps. Now, these loose wraps moving forward, I want to develop a nice smooth transition to the body, and again, you can see the sheen and shine that's already bleeding through. Now, when you're dealing with chironomids and you're tying these larger patterns, I prefer loose wraps here, not the heavy, tight, secure wraps. I want to make sure that I have segmentation bleeding through, and I'm going to stop here about 1 bead's length behind the bead on the hook where I can develop the collar. So you can see the beautiful red coloration, and behind that we have the wraps of the wire, which gives it a little hot butt. And when we come back through with 8/0, we're going to use white for this imitation, just like we did the other flies, 8/0 and white. And for those who are starting fly tying, the tag end is going to be key. Here we're going to use a tag end of about 1.5 inches or less. The longer the tag end you use, the less control you have for each wrap. So make sure that you have smaller tag ends. And we're going to start on my side of the hook shank with the tag end of thread. I'll bend it away from my body and start wrapping to the left. And when I wrap to the left, I'm going to stop right at the transition of wire and tubing. And from this point, you have a couple decisions to make here. I'm going to grab the tag end, come back down with my scissors, cut that flush close to the hook shank itself, and then I'm going to grab the tag end of wire and tubing. I'm going to move this forward, and then I'll come back and do 1, 2, 3 loose wraps, and then I'll switch to my dominant hand, and I'm going to secure wrap 2 or 3 times moving forward. We then have the wire and tubing, the tag end, which is extra long, sticking towards the bead. I'm going to come back and I'm going to cut this about halfway down. And the reason I want to cut that, measure it out halfway down, is I'll come back with my scissors and I'm going to mash that tag end down to the hook shank, and eventually it pokes right into the bead. It keeps the bead towards the eye of the hook. I'll then come back with my dominant hand and I'm going to start developing a nice, flat, even runway of thread. Now the key here when we're wrapping our thread to the left and then to the right is we don't want any potholes, dips, or valleys. If you have any potholes in your street or your runway that you're trying to develop, when you wrap your ostrich later, it's not going to stand up tall. We want to make sure that's flat surface, it's nice and clean, and again, developing the best runway that we possibly can. I'm going to wrap it to the right, wrap it to the left, and I'll usually do this about 3 to 4 times. Now this is when we're going to come in with a little bit of flash, and just like a bling midge, when I attach flash, I don't want the flash to be on the collar. This is where we're going to develop the collar out of ostrich. Instead, what I want tinsel and flash on top of the wire and tubing. So I'm going to grab that tinsel and I'm going to cut that at an angle to a fine point, which you see here. Now the reason I cut that to a fine point, it's easier to attach this to the hook shank, and I'm going to point that forward and down. Now before I do this, I learned this trick from Charlie Craven, is I'm going to twist my thread, and I'm going to let it twist here about 50, 60 times. And by doing that, I develop a nice rope like a Twizzler effect where it's easier to grab materials. I'll then do 1 loose wrap, a second loose wrap, and I'll secure wrap all the way to the bead, developing that flat runway, and then secure wrap all the way to the bend. I'm going to stop right at the transition of wire and tubing. Now again, here what we want is a solid wrap of flash on top of the wire and tubing. So the way to apply some of your materials to the hook shank, I learned to tie, believe it or not, at the Angler's Covey when I was 13 years old. Gary Alameda at the end of the class gave everybody a beer. I got a soda. Since then, I'm able to celebrate with the beer. But I'll never forget being able to tie some of the classic patterns, the hare's ears, the muddler minnows, spinning deer hair, building posts for parachute Adams. I also learned the pinch method. The pinch method's very simple but very effective. With my thumb and index finger on my dominant and non-dominant hand, I'm going to do wraps evenly around the hook shank and trade off below. Each time you do this, you gain control. Now you can also do this with the rotary vise, where a rotary vise you're going to rotate forward and it's going to rotate towards the eye of the hook, moving the material to the eye. Either one works. But if we grab this 1 wrap of large tinsel, I'm going to wrap it behind the thread, bring this forward, and then do a loose wrap on top of the thread, a second loose wrap on top of the thread, and then secure wrap twice. And you'll see what we have there. Now we have flash above and on top of the wire and tubing, and then we have the collar where we're going to develop a little bit of that attractant using the ostrich herl. So I'm going to come back after this and I'm going to use the back of the scissors and I'm going to cut that flush, get rid of that tag end, and then wrap the thread again one last time to the bead, and then wrap it back towards the bend, stopping in front of the now flash on top of the wire and tubing. So how many here have used ostrich before? Show of hands. How many here enjoy using ostrich? How many here think it's a pain to apply? Some honest anglers in the audience. It used to drive me crazy. I'd tie a fly, mini leech, or I'd tie one of the Titan tube midges and think, okay, this is the collar. It's going to turn out great. Sometimes it'd stand up tall. Other times it was mashed down on top of itself. The secret is when you start using ostrich, there's a spine on the material. And again, pre-double IPA, and everybody's like, well, you can't drink with these flies. You can afterwards in celebration before you go to bed for the next day's trip. Now, when we clean off the spine, I'm going to cut off a tag end. It's going to look something like this. And when we're cleaning off the spine, the thing to make sure of is that you're concentrating on the spine. When you look at it and measure it above the hook shank, you want the spine facing up. I'm then going to tilt that 45 degrees, and the secret here is I want the spine facing the eye of the hook. That way, when I wrap the material forward, it's going to unravel to the left and stand up tall. If the spine is facing the bend of the hook to the left, when you wrap it forward, it's going to mash down on top of itself. So again, placing this on my side of the hook shank, right at the transition point, I'm going to spin the thread. Mr. Craven taught us that trick, and then I'm going to grab that rope with the loose wrap and then grab and stop hanging the bobbin below and check to make sure, again, that spine is facing the eye of the hook. I'm then going to wrap that thread towards the bead, stopping behind the bead with some secure wraps, probably 5 or 6 secure wraps. We're going to go back to that pincher method, thumb and index finger in our dominant, non-dominant hand, and we're going to trade off the ostrich moving forward. And again, by doing this, you'll see what we develop. It's this beautiful collar standing up nice and tall, and this is going to be the attractant. The attractant that we want when we're tying flies, but most importantly, the attractor you want when you're dealing with migratory fish. Fish in stillwater move their whole life, so it's very important that we're trying to track these fish. Now, when I stop here with the tag in, I'm going to grab the bobbin with my left hand, and I'm going to do one loose wrap, a second loose wrap, and then I'll pull the tag in to the left, and I'll secure wrap twice. Now, the secret here when you're working with beads and material behind the bead, especially collars or hackle, you want to act like you're rubbing something around the rim of a tyer. The thread needs to wrap the rim of the bead. That way it doesn't mash down the material to the left. That's a secret when you're tying and developing flies to ensure that you still have that tall collar. I'll then come back with the scissors and I'm going to cut that tag in flush to the left. A little bit of leftover is not a bad thing at all. We'll wrap it once, twice, and then we'll come back again with the whip finish tool. And for those who are learning how to use the whip finish tool, the handle above that's going to be a ball. We're going to pinch that ball. Above that's going to be the tool itself, the metal arm, which has a hook and a divot in the back. When I grab the thread, I'm going to pull it towards my body. I'm going to hook the thread, lift the thread up around the divot, release the ball, and then bring the tool to the top. And by doing this, I develop an arrow with a point. I can manipulate that point and place it on my side of the bead. I'll then do one loose wrap, wrapping around the bead rim, a second loose wrap, lift up, release the divot, pull the hook down, and then repeat the process. I promise you, you want to do this. Always whip finish twice. If you don't, your fly is going to start falling apart in the river. You're going to be scrambling for super glue in your bag, and then you'll have to glue that sucker together. It's happened. We've all been there. So a second whip finish knot's going to be key here, wrapping around the rim, behind the bead, lift up the backside, pull the hook down, and just like slicing knives through butter, we're going to slice that thread right underneath so it lifts up and disappears into the hook shank. Then we'll grab that leftover wire extending off the back, 3 to 4 wraps of wire, and I'm going to helicopter this counterclockwise with tension until it breaks. It's going to leave that leftover small piece of wire. Now remember what we did before. If you weren't here for that, I'm going to show you again. My favorite adhesive in the world, Loctite Super Glue. It adheres clear and it doesn't flake off in cold weather conditions. Now, in using Loctite Super Glue, I just by chance found out that if you apply it to a magnet, it literally will stay moist for 2.5 hours, one drop. Because oxygen cannot penetrate the magnet, the key to that is imagine if you opened up your fly box and you grabbed a small piece of wire and you started dipping it in Loctite Super Glue and you place one drop behind the eye of the hook, one drop at the bend, you've made all your flies twice as durable. It's something great to do, and for the tube midge and the Titan tube midge, these micro droplets we're going to wipe right at the bend, and then we're going to wipe right behind the bead, and by doing that, we give it complete control, and we secure the fly. So this is the final design, the Titan tube midge. For those who haven't experienced a stillwater bite, it's coming around the corner. My heart's starting to race and shake a little bit thinking about it. There's so many giant fish. If you do not have the proper gear for that, come down to the Angler's Covey, go to Charlie Craven's Fly Shop, Charlie's Fly Box, buy a brand new rod, reel, and fly line because you'll need these when you battle fish that blow you into your backing. It's incredible just how strong they can be. And lastly, a great way to store your flies. After you're done tying and you're celebrating, unwinding, decompressing for the night, you pop open your Snoop Dogg wine, you grab that cork and make sure you hold on to that sucker because that's what we put the flies onto. And the end result is the Titan tube midge. Available 12, 14, and 16 in size with Umpqua Feather Merchants. This year, I'm happy to announce that we have the new version of this fly, which is going to be a sneak peek coming up here at one of the fly fishing shows starting at Denver next weekend. We have the Trident tube midge, which we added a wing bud, different colorations. Those are all available this year and moving into next year as well. So I'm going to place that on the cork. Again, after the event, we're going to pass that around the room. But now we have the small version, the tube midge, and the older brother of that, the Titan tube midge. And again, colorations to match. It's unbelievable how how effective these patterns are on rivers and still waters alike. Okay, last but not least, one of my favorite patterns of all time. So when I started guiding, I realized quickly when you're on the water, you have to produce daily. And when I say produce, it's not just the number of fish you catch, it's making yourself a better angler and the people with you. Always remain a student. When doing so, you have to have confidence in your flies. And I needed a confidence fly that I could use every single day in the water, whether it's high water, low water, dirty, or clear water, in every season of the year, winter, spring, summer, and fall. And I came up with my leech series. And the reason leeches are great is they're found during all those seasons and water conditions. The other thing that's great about leeches, they're non-escaping food supplies. And trout know this. Anytime a trout doesn't have to expend energy to chase down a meal, it's going to do so. A meal that does not escape and moves fast and attracts the fish like leeches really can be the cat's meow. So when starting this design, my favorite pattern of all time, micro pine squirrel. And I'm sure responsible for the shortage on the market of this. If you find it in black, buy 100 packages because you will not find it again. I promise you. It's going to have you eyeballing squirrels in your backyard. That's the other thing that will happen, I promise, because it's so effective. It's a smaller version of some of the rabbit cuts that we're all used to using. The rabbit cuts in the past were fairly tall and fairly long. Micro pine squirrel with an 8-inch cut on the skin, you have that small fur extending to the left. And when this gets wet and it starts to move subsurface, it looks almost identical to a freshwater leech. So it's incredible how effective it can be. And just like we did with the Titan 2 midge, you're going to look like a cheerleader up here, but I promise you'll be cheering for those giant fish that take the leech. It's almost not even legal and fair when you put this on a hook, just how effective it can be. And I'll talk you through the process and how we're going to fish this fly. We're also going to apply a little bit of flash. And the flash on this is going to be with midge flash or crystal flash. And in the past, what would happen in my organized chaos, which is called my fly tying table, I would take these out of the package and it looked like a bad fro at the end of the day. So instead of doing that, the secret is you cut a little arrow shape on the bottom of the bag, pull one strand out at a time. That way we're trying to clean our desk, and you'll learn this as you start tying more flies. Not only will you design more flies, you'll learn how to clean your desk more effectively, because if not, if you leave it and figure I'll come back the next day, a month later, it's going to take you an hour to find your materials. So that's a nice little tip and trick. We're going to pull that off and leave that to the side. Now, in designing the fly, the material that you're going to use, it's important to mix and match the colors. And my unweighted series, a lot of anglers are familiar with, the Mayer's Mini Leech. The Mayer's Mini Leech is tied on a 2488H, just like the tube midge. The unweighted series has its advantages, but I realized quickly I need an anchor fly. I need a fly that can now sit down below an indicator, sit below a dry fly, or be the anchor fly in a Euro rig that's going to move, pulsate, and undulate subsurface conditions. And that's when we came up using the XT500 or Umpqua 60-degree jig hooks matched with the radiant bead. And because we're getting ready to pop into the spring, I can't believe it's already that time frame, we're going to do an egg-sucking leech. And there's nothing better to piss off a large trout than a leech chasing an egg, or a leech moving through the run with an egg in its mouth. And then the trout sees that and knows that's almost a double bang or a double whopper for its buck. Now, starting this fly out, we're going to wrap the thread, again, using a short tag end. And we're going to do this wrapping around the hook shank away from my body, moving to the left. When I do this moving to the left, you'll notice there's a tag end of thread. That tag end of thread is going to become your friend in a ramp. I'm going to lift it up at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to wrap on top of that, moving to the left. And when I do so, I'll stop right above the barb just behind the hook point. Now, you have an option here. You can break the thread like I'm going to do to look cool, but I warn you, in breaking the thread, there's a good chance the whole fly falls apart. We're all human. We've all been there. We're all going to have that experience. Now, next up, we're going to attach the midge flash in orange to the hook shank. What I would do in the past is I would grab a tag end and I would try to wrap the thread loosely around the tag end and seat it down on the hook shank. And this would drive me crazy. Half the time it'd rotate to the other side of the hook, and I don't have a lot of hair left to lose, and I try to pull my hair out. It was a nightmare. So instead, the easier method here is to grab the one strand of crystal flash, and we're going to bend that around the thread. By bending this around the thread, if I lift the thread up, I'm going to slide this down to the hook shank. After doing that, I'll wrap on top of the material, moving to the left twice, and then secure wrap moving towards the bead. And when I secure wrap moving towards the bead, I'll stop with 2 wraps back wrapped behind the bead. So when my thread stops, I always want to back wrap. If you don't, your thread can unravel when it moves forward, so be sure to secure your thread wraps down. And just like we did prior with our materials, we're going to use the pinch method here. My thumb and index finger on my dominant and non-dominant hand, I'm going to wrap the material on top of the hook shank, moving towards the bead, getting nice even wraps. And even if it separates here, you still have control. You can fill in any void as you move these wraps towards the bead. And I'm going to stop at about a bead's length behind the bead, do one loose wrap, a second loose wrap, and then secure wrap twice. From here, I'm going to cut that tag in flush close to the hook shank itself. Then I'll come back with the thread and mash down those tag ends of Crystal Flash. And at this point, we're going to design the wing, which ultimately is the body of the leech. Now online, you'll see videos of this tied certain ways, and I'm going to show you the proper way. This is incredibly important. When you tie the Mayer's mini leech unweighted, there's a curve to the hook shank. The curve to the hook shank is ideal because if I extend the material to the left of the curve, it's not going to bend down and foul the hook. So I can move and swing that fly or strip that fly or retrieve it without any issues. When you design a fly using a straight shank like we have here in the 60-degree jig hook, I'm not going to attach this material with the skin facing the hook shank. I'm going to attach it with the skin or the hide facing up and away from the hook shank. Reason for that, there's some key factors. If I'm using this below a dry fly, it lands softly and it slows the sinking rate down. The other advantage is because the skin or the hide is heavier than the fur, it's going to whip or flip down. The jigging motion is going to extend away from the hook point. And then last but not least, when you're using this fly and you've designed it, it helps it become balanced. When this fly is attached using an improved clench knot or a seated knot, it's balanced below the water surface. Every bump, wave, or riffle, this fly is going to move, and think about the advantages you have there. How many times have you been there where you slap a hopper on the bank or next to the bank and it drops off onto the edge of the river? And then the fish looks up and you think it's going to come up and eat the hopper. You're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And at the last minute, it breaks away and goes back down. You start crying profusely. We have to enter therapy. I promise eventually we'll come back from this experience. Now imagine you intercept this fish. This is what's almost not legal. You slap the hopper on the water surface, the fish shoots up, and as it's coming up to investigate your dry fly, boom, there's a hanging leech. It's almost a guarantee these fish will take. And the same for a Euro rig. Let's say we have an unweighted leech, and then on the bottom as the anchor fly, you have a weighted leech, and they're both at the same time jigging opposite directions.